and wounded 55 others. Then, dramatic escalation of violence on the 31st of December 2019 outside the US Embassy in Baghdad, which was stormed by supporters of the Iranian-backed militia. President Donald Trump has blamed this attack by militia members on the US Embassy on Iran. As a result, the United States has deployed 750 more troops to the Middle East. And then on the 1st of January 2020, Iran says it has nothing to do with the attack on the embassy. And now we are hearing that the protesters have left the embassy compound. But it is key to note here that this has indeed exacerbated tensions, already bad tensions, already high tensions between the United States and Iran. Let's discuss this further. Joining us now, live from Istanbul, is Mr. Mathew Bryza, former U.S. diplomat who worked under the Obama administration as ambassador to Azerbaijan. And from the United States, we have Mark Tomass. He's an adjunct professor at the Harvard University Extension School. And then from Israel, joining us on telephone is Dr. Amatzia Baram. He is the director of the Center for Iraq Studies at the University of Haifa. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Professor Mark Tomass, let me start with you. What do you make up of this latest round of tensions between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, the scene in Iraq is very complicated. I mean, first you had the protest against the government, protest against corruption. The U.S. wanted to make this, to convert this protest into a strategic victory and turn it as a protest against Iran, arguing that everything that Iraq is experiencing, all the bad governance it's experiencing, because the government in Iraq is a puppet of the Iranian regime. So basically, to turn the anger of the population against their corrupt government towards Iran. So that has been one thing taking place before this problem arose. Then you have this attack that took place against the military base in Kirkuk. The U.S. What happened? The U.S. responded. The U.S. adopted the Israeli model in responding to potential threats. So basically, it reacted by retaliation in a strategic way. Because one of the strategic aims of the United States is to create a division between Iran and Syria, to have Iraq, to remove Iraq as a conduit between Iran and Syria. So strategically, the United States bombarded the camps and the weapon depots in Al-Qa'im. This is the area that it's a linking point between Iraq and Syria, which the United States and Israel suspect that this is where the arms shipments are taking place from Iran to Iraq to the Lebanese Hezbollah. So obviously it is a disproportional retaliation, and that angered the Iranians, not only the Iranians, obviously the Iraqis, the Iraqi militias. But before we discuss in detail the consequences of this, let me give you a brief contextual analysis of what these militias are. We are speaking about the Popular Mobilization Force that was established in response to ISIS invading and walking into Mosul and Tikrit, and that took place in June 2014 as a direct result of a fatwa, a religious judgment issued by Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who is an Iranian-born cleric who presides in Al-Najaf. So he is considered to be the supreme reference in Shia terminology, the supreme reference, the supreme religious authority in Iran. And that fatwa led to the mobilization of many people who volunteered to join this mobilization force. And that mobilization force was able to evict ISIS from many areas in Iraq, of course, with the help of the US. I mean, the US was bombarding from the air, and they were the ground troops. So what they did was they solved the problem that the Iraqi army had. The Iraqi army disintegrated, its defenses collapsed against the ISIS expansion. So this came in order to fill that gap. Moreover, the other element that they have accomplished was to eliminate the prospects of creation an independent Kurdish state in the Kurdish region. On October 16, the Iraqi army, along with these militias, actually these militias are called in Iraq armed forces. So you have the Iraqi army and the armed forces. So they were integrated within the armed forces. And these militias walked into Kirkuk. They chased the Kurdish troops that were followers of al-Barzani out, the Kurdish president. And basically they muted all of the independence referendum that took place a week before that. This second move was a very upsetting move for the United States, because one of the aims of the United States is to break the region down into three states. You know, in Kurdish, a Sunni in Anbar, and the Shia in the south.
Okay. Now, Matthew, let me come to you. Relationship between the United States and Iran is already not healthy, and now we are witnessing another round of tensions. Do you think this could possibly result in further violence or perhaps a military confrontation between the two countries?
Well, I don't think that's so likely now after the militia stepped away. And after the Iraqi government decided to fulfill its responsibility of providing security. You know, nobody's supposed to get into the green zone, which is where the U.S. Embassy is located. But the Iraqi security services had let this militia and its members come in. Well, now the Iraqi government has changed its course after phone calls between the Prime Minister of Iraq, the Secretary of State of the United States. And in addition, President Trump himself has signaled his desire, as he did, I guess, on the 31st of December, for peace. He said quite clearly, he said, we don't want war with Iran. And so I think a slightly longer context is necessary to understand what's happening here. There's been a serious sort of a cat and mouse game going on for many months. In fact, since August of 2018, when President Trump decided to withdraw from the so-called JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. At that time, the U.S. reimposed sanctions, which cut oil supplies, or the ability of Iran to market its oil globally. Iran has responded with a series of military actions or military-like actions in the Gulf, in the Straits of Hormuz, putting mines on oil tankers, shooting down a U.S. drone last June. There was a missile attack on Saudi oil pipelines in May, and then the big attack on Saudi oil facilities in September. Each and every time, many in the world community, including us on your show, Jafar, we had discussed the likelihood that President Trump and the U.S. would respond militarily. And the U.S. didn't. It showed remarkable restraint in contrast to the bluster of President Trump. It was only when finally an American was killed, an American contractor in this last attack, that the U.S. did respond. And I think probably Washington feels that it needed to do something forceful to restore the deterrent to Iran, using these militias and military force to undercut U.S. national interests. That all said, however, I think President Trump's preference remains to find a way to talk to President Rouhani and come up with a new deal, a new Iran nuclear deal that will show indeed President Trump is the ultimate deal maker, and he can do much better than President Obama, at least in his own mind.
Okay. And now we also have Dr. Amatzia Baram on the line with us on telephone. Dr. Baram, let me ask you, do you think that the United States responded in a disproportionate manner by conducting airstrikes and killing 25 of the Iranian-backed militia fighters?
Well, they didn't kill civilians, they killed fighters. Is it disproportionate? It's difficult to say. I mean, some may say it's in the eye of the beholder. I really cannot judge it. I certainly wouldn't say emphatically that this is disproportionate, proportionate, for the simple reason that the first speaker forgot to mention that there were 11 attacks during the last couple of months, 11 attacks by the same militia, Iraqi Shia militia, against, now the interesting question is, against whom? They launched 11 attacks against Iraqi army bases, which are also, of course, hosting American forces. So they were shooting against Iraqi military bases. Of course, they meant to kill Americans, but for some reason, for obvious, you cannot be so accurate. Point is that they have been not they, but the government of Abdel Mahdi was warned, I think, 3 or 4 different times, and pretty sternly, that if they don't stop it, America will have to do something. But until now, until the last attack, no Americans were killed. And so I guess the administration was very careful not to make things worse. Now they were caught in a dilemma. If they don't respond, then really they are becoming, it's an open season on them. If they do respond, they will be, most Iraqis will be very upset. Now, there was no question about it. So it's a real dilemma. They decided to do it this time. The way I look at it is very simple. If they decide not to do anything against Iran directly, because we all know it's quite open that Iran is the one who gives the orders. General Soleimani is the boss. So if they don't decide not to operate against Iran, and that's legitimate for whatever reasons, then eventually they'll have to operate against Iraqi militias. There is one more or two more mistakes that I heard from the first speaker. He is correct saying that the Hashd is the Popular Mobilization. All these, not all, most of these militias were established as a result of Grand Ayatollah Sistani's fatwa. This is absolutely correct. The mistake is that today, and I mean explicitly, Sistani is calling upon all the militias to disband. He says they did their job, thank you very much, I want you either to go home or to join the Iraqi official military on an individual basis. Of course, they are not even going to think about it because Iran does not want them to do that. But Sistani today is against the militias and for the army, for the official army. That's number 2. Number 3, it is not exactly the case that even more, it's not the case that the Americans attack now this base of this particular militia because it is a part of the policy of preventing Iran using Iraq as a stepping stone towards Syria. Yes, they would like to do that, but they wouldn't attack anybody because of that, and they didn't. It exists for the last 4 years, 5 years, and even more. And the Americans haven't done anything about it. The retaliation was for the was killed.
Okay, Professor Mark Tomass, let me come to you now. Looking at the latest developments, would you agree that Iran is intervening in Iraqi internal affairs?
Yes, I would agree with that, and I think the way Iranians are thinking is that Iraq has been a problem for Iran for a very long time, and they wanted to take advantage of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in order to turn Iraq into a friendly state towards Iran. And as you know, Saddam Hussein began his war, and it took 8 years. The aim of the war was to contain the Iranian Islamic Revolution. That failed. Saddam Hussein failed. He couldn't accomplish what he was supposed to accomplish. The Iranian regime survived. But the Iranian regime wants to have a friendly neighbor, right? So therefore, because Iraq is weak, because the Iraqi state disintegrated, because the Iraqi army disintegrated, they felt that they have to go in personally, send their own individuals like Qasem Soleimani to manage the military operations. And in order to do that, you have to intervene. You have to have influence with the government. You have to have influence with many of the organs of the army, of the states, including the funding of these militias. So if you look at it from a long time span, Iran sees no other option. Iran doesn't want to leave Iraq in a state of chaos, because that would mean that many forces could intervene into Iraq and cause a threat against Iran. So yes, Iran is intervening, and I think it will continue to do so, not only in Iraq, but also, as we have seen, in Syria. It feels that the entire west of Iran is a strategic depth of Iran, so it wants to use the power that it has in order to expand its influence over the politics and the military development in the area.
Okay, now, Mathew, we are also witnessing some very strong statements coming from the Iranian side. Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander recently said, quote, "We are not leading the country to war, but we are not afraid of any war, and we tell America to speak correctly with the Iranian nation. We have the power to break them several times over, and we are not worried." What exactly is Iran trying to achieve right now?
Well, I think those sorts of statements are in response to President Trump's own belligerent threat. In fact, he tweeted a couple of days ago. He actually said Iran will pay a big price if this continues, and this is not a warning. In all caps, he said this is a threat. So if you're an Iranian senior official or leader, you can't just let that sort of a threat from the U.S. president go unanswered. And I think they're, to a certain extent, calling President Trump's bluff. Because they know President Trump wants talks. They know President Trump doesn't want a military solution. And in fact, yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why John Bolton is no longer President Trump's national security advisor, because Ambassador Bolton wanted a confrontation with Iran. Again, I'm not so concerned about the possibility of escalation at this point. On the contrary, I think the situation is de-escalating. The last point I'd like to make, though, is President Trump, when he makes these belligerent statements, or when the U.S. attacks this militia, is actually doing something that's contrary to his maximum pressure on Iran policy, right? Because this particular militia is extremely unpopular in Iraq. In fact, it's a Shia militia, but the Shia population of Iraq has been in the streets protesting corruption, not only by the typical Iraqi government officials, but by this very militia and the People's Mobilization Units, which have formed their own actual ministry inside the Iranian government. So they're being attacked by Iraqi civilians. The Iraqi government for months has wanted to rein in this militia. Now, when the U.S. has attacked this militia, it has, in some ways, countered some of that opposition.
Okay, now, Mathew, if I could add one more question here. You said that these statements, to what extent do you think these strong statements, both by the United States and Iran, are threatening peace, not just in Iraq and Iran, but in the region as a whole?
Yeah, again, going back to my original statements, or even just now, anytime there's use of force, of course, that's not peaceful. But, in my experience in U.S. diplomacy, I've seen that there are times when one side, or either side, but one side is taking forceful steps, like the guest from Israel said, repeated provocations, repeated attacks, and there's no answer. Yet the U.S. side keeps saying there's going to be an answer. Something must happen to restore a sense of deterrence, or else the provocateur is just going to keep on going. So I do think that the strong statements aside, as frightening as they may sound, it's actually maybe a series of necessary steps now on the Washington side. And the question will be, can President Trump create a unified policy that takes advantage of this toning down on the Iranian side of these provocations and finds a way to move forward that breaks the cycle of escalation? Okay,
Dr. Baram, let me come to you. The recent violence comes as Iran and its allies have faced unprecedented mass protests in recent months, and after heavy U.S. sanctions on Iran that have deteriorated Iran's economy and raised tensions across the region. How do you relate what's happening in Iraq to Iran's economic condition?
I agree. I think all three of us agree that Iran is actually strangleholding actually strangling Iraq and actually controlling Iraq. Are they doing it purely as self-defense? I doubt it. Saddam is gone. The Ba'ath are completely gone. The Sunnis are completely beaten. The government is Shia. The ruling majority is Shia. Hegemonic majority, I'd say, are Shia. They would like to have good relation with Iran, but Iran, for them, it's not enough. I'm not saying that it's only aggressive. It could be, in a way of making sure nothing bad happens in Iraq. But really, there is no danger because now the government is Iraqi and Shia, not Sunni and not Ba'ath, not anything. So I would say, if I were the Iranian supreme leader, I would say, leave Iraq alone. Let's just have commerce with them, and we shall be okay. But the Iranians have a different approach. I would say that right now, as we see it here, there is danger. There is danger because there is a certain momentum that we see, and it has to be stopped. The momentum is more and more Iranian aggression. They do it mostly by proxy, but they still do it. And at a certain point, even the presidents of the United States could not just, stay passive. So he did whatever he did. You can like it, you can don't like it, you can hate it. It doesn't matter. But he did it. The question is what's happening now. I would present it from the Iraqi point of view and from the Israeli one. Very briefly, the Iraqi point of view, don't forget that the hundreds of thousands, some say millions, of demonstrators are all Shia in Iraq, all Shia. Sunnis didn't participate at all, or perhaps 1%. The Sunni areas are absolutely quiet. No demonstrating people, groups, nothing. So what they are demonstrating against are two things. A, government corruption, and B, the fact that the government is completely controlled by Tehran. They don't like it because they are Iraqis. They are both Shia and Iraqis. They're not only Shia. So they don't like it. I would say if the Iraqi government now, the new government, there will be a new government, will not find a way of neutralizing the pro-Iranian militias, Iraq then will be in chaos. Right now, until recently, it was not in chaos. But too much Iranian involvement, too much Iranian pressure, that caused a beginning of a chaotic state. Now, one more thing. Iran controls completely the Iraqi economy. That, too, up to a point, is good. A lot of mutual trade. But 95% of the trade are merchandise sold to the Iraqis, and only 5% are Iraqi merchandise sold in Iran. This is very great imbalance. And the Iraqis feel that they are being taken economic advantage by the Iranians. There's a lot of resentment. So I would say, and I being the supreme leader, I would be much more careful and much more restrained, and I would establish good neighborhood. That's what I would do. That's not what they are doing. Right now, okay. the demonstrators are having a real dilemma. It is a genuine dilemma. They don't want Iran in Iraq, but they also don't want America to attack Iraq and Iraqi organizations, however they don't like them. Sistani found a way to express it. His latest announcement is really, I think, emblematic.
Okay.
I'll just say, Sistani said to the Americans, do not attack Iraq. If you have an account to settle with Iran, settle it with Iran, not with us. This is what most Iraqis feel.
Okay. Professor Mark Tomass, now putting the U.S. out of the equation for a moment, putting the recent airstrikes by the U.S. out of the equation, thousands of demonstrators on a daily basis were out in Iraq anyway. And now, with this latest development, we are witnessing the Shias on one side, the Sunnis on one side. Could this possibly result in a civil war in Iraq?
Well, certainly there are certain people would like a civil war to start in Iran, in Iraq, and to probably have it disintegrate and therefore eventually divide it into three parts. Whether these protests will lead to a civil war or not, I doubt. I doubt it is not. It hasn't reached a level that bad. I think the Iraqis have reached some level of awareness that they are realizing that they have a corrupt government, a failed government, almost a failed state, and this is not a Sunni Shia issue. What will happen in the future, I can't really predict in the long run. That said, I think my feeling is that what's happening in Iraq now is maybe would move towards, maybe not towards what happened in Syria. In other words, you have Iran, you have a confrontation taking place between Iran and Israel, and Syria paid its price, and maybe now it's time for Iraq to pay its price, because Israel and the United States are not willing to attack Iran directly because it has a deterrent force. So they are having the war, that fight being conducted in Iraq, as it was conducted in Syria before.
Okay, Mathew, coming to you. In your answer to my previous question, you said that something needs to be done to restore peace between the United States and Iran. What would that be? What needs to be done? We saw escalation of tensions between Iran and the US throughout 2019. So how do we proceed from this point?
Well, I actually think what has just happened is a step in the direction of restoring some semblance of stability. Again, Iran had launched these 11 attacks against Iraqi military bases, going after U.S. soldiers. They had seized oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. They had mined oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. They had shot down the U.S. drone, attacked the Saudi oil facilities, attacked the pipeline in Saudi Arabia, all without any consequence militarily. And so my reading of Iran is, as long as they can get away with that sort of action, they're going to keep on going. They're rational actors. A price has been imposed. The U.S. response was robust. What happened with bringing in 100 U.S. Marines into the embassy compound made clear U.S. is going to use force. If these protesters come over the wall, the U.S. will kill them. The people in the Marines will kill them. Having been an ambassador, I would have given that order as well. You have to save your people if you're under attack. At the same time, the U.S. has still 5,000 troops on the ground, another 750 coming in, potent military capabilities. I think that if push came to shove, the United States would not have hesitated very long in going after the protesters outside the embassy. That would have been a disaster. That would have opened Pandora's box, been a bloodbath, and really led to instability. So now everybody has stepped back. And as I was saying a little while ago, now President Trump actually has an opportunity to try to shape the relationship with Iran from a position of greater strength, take the high ground, which I think he was trying to do in his own twisted way by saying, we don't want war, we want peace. So we have an opportunity now to do just what you were saying, Jafar, get the U.S. and Iranian governments to be talking to each other about de-escalation. It's very much up to the Iranian side now. Will the Iranian side recognize this opportunity and take it, or will it continue to bluster and provoke? It's up to Tehran.
And Mathew, with regards to the latest attack on the U.S. Embassy, do you think it's a good idea for the United States to increase its military presence in the Middle East?
Well, as you could tell from my previous response, yes, definitely. I mean, the U.S. ambassador who was murdered in Benghazi was a former colleague and friend of mine, and that happened for many reasons. But one lesson learned was there has to be a rapid reaction force nearby that can get to a diplomatic facility and save the U.S. diplomatic personnel that may be under attack. And that is what happened. And that's because there is a U.S. rapid reaction force nearby. Also, troops are being brought in from Fort Bragg, the 82nd Airborne Division. A battalion's coming in. I think that, yeah, that is what's necessary because the Iranian side must see that there are serious consequences, a serious price to be paid if you attack U.S. personnel.
Okay. Dr. Baram, let me come to you now. From an Israeli point of view, what do you see happening with Iran, Iraq, and the United States in 2020? I think we lost Dr. Baram. Our team here will try to get him back.
Hello? You hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we have him back online now. Yeah, Dr. Baram, so I was asking you, from an Israeli point of view, from an Israeli perspective, what do you see will happen with regards to the relationship among Iraq, Iran, and the United States?
Well, the best outcome would be that the Iranians will agree to reopen the negotiations and to negotiate over a better nuclear agreement. I think it's possible. In Iran, there are people who are actually politicians, who are actually supporting this idea, but right now the Supreme Leader and the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guards, are strongly against it. So those who support this idea cannot further it. However, the Israeli fear is that if there is a confrontation, a serious one, not a very carefully calibrated American strike on one or two Iranian installations just to deter them, but something more serious, that the Iranians will instruct Hezbollah in Lebanon to open fire on Israel. This is a serious concern because they have perhaps, as far as we know, 150,000 missiles, a few hundred of them very precise. And they can shower on us about 1,500 missiles a day, which is really immense. And the damage, and the Israeli chief of staff just warned and said if that happens, the damage to civilians in Israel will be extremely high. So that is something, of course, the fact that we should punish Lebanon for that or Hezbollah for that is no consolation for us at all. So, of course, we hope it won't happen. The question is, so what should Iran do? What should America do? What should Iraq do? On the Iraqi side, that's very simple. Follow Grand Ayatollah Sistani's advice, view. And he says the militias should disband immediately, and they can join the military individually as individual soldiers, and so no problem with that. But as long as they are organized as militias, they are really Iranian proxies, and this is there is no Iraqi independence of decision here. So he says that's sovereignty is affected. That's number one. About Iraq, he makes a series of. He puts forward a series of ideas which he got from the demonstrators. New elections, new electoral law, new government of professionals, not of corrupt politicians, and so on. That also is a good way to begin move, along which it's a good idea to begin moving. America and Iran, I would say something that looks to be very simple. America, President Trump, cannot go back on his demand to revise the 2015 nuclear agreement. He cannot. The Iranians can, as I see it at least, the Iranians can. They can find a way that will keep their honor intact. I have a few ideas about it. There's no time for that, but there is a way of keeping their honor intact. It's important. Honor is very important. Respect and so on. And then get to the chase of it and find some kind of a new agreement on the nukes. If that's possible, this is the way out. Otherwise, I really don't know what can be done.
Okay. And my last question would be to Professor Mark Tomass. What should be done to restore peace between Iran and the United States? And do you think it's a good idea for Iran to rethink its policy on supporting proxies in Iraq?
Well, I think Iran should as Mathew was saying, Iran should take advantage of the presence of Donald Trump in power at this time and strike a deal regarding the nuclear program. I think Iran is willing to strike a deal on the nuclear program. The problem is the ballistic missile program that it has. The United States and Israel wants Iran to abandon its ballistic missile program, and I think Iran is not willing to do that because it would feel it would be defenseless in the same way Saddam Hussein was defenseless against the U.S. attack. the U.S. invasion. So I think Iran, that would be out of the question for Iran. So the question here would be whether the United States would be willing to settle the nuclear deal without the ballistic missile deal, without a ballistic missile deal. That's one thing. Regarding, I really think we are looking at minor issues here. Like these are symptoms. What we are seeing are symptoms of a much bigger problem. And the bigger problem is the place of Israel in the Middle East vis-a-vis the states that have not accepted the existence of Israel. I think we have to go to the core components there and see why is it that we have these rejectionist policies of Iran, of probably the Shia government in Syria, and probably and Syria itself. Why is it that they are rejecting the existence of Israel? And why is that making Israel insecure and therefore responding by influencing the United States and influencing its policy in the Middle East? I think without talking about that, it would be a waste of time. We will see these kind of incidents repeated. I don't also see any major war taking place at this time because of the deterrence that Iran has, and as your guest from Israel said, that Hezbollah has a sizable missile capability that would be very disturbing, very harmful to civilians and military in Israel, which would imply that Israel would respond possibly with tactical nuclear weapons that would be catastrophic for the entire region. So I think we should calm down. All the parties should calm down and try to think, why are we distrusting each other so much?
All right. Dr. Mark Tomass, thank you very much. Mathew Bryza in Istanbul, thank you very much. And Dr. Amatzia Baram from Israel, thank you very much to all of you for talking to us on The Brief. And this brings us to the end of this episode. Stay tuned on A News. News will continue on the hour, and I'll be back with The Brief next Tuesday.